Welcome to this webinar. It's essentially future-proofing your farm. We've really kind of styled it as a bit of a workshop. So it's going to have 3 sections. I'm going to share a kind of very basic business risk assessment tool that you might find useful. And then Katy Barker from Growing Communities is going to talk about the business contingency that they've been doing. And then Helena Dove is going to talk about what we need to think about in terms of what we grow in relation to climate change. So I'm really looking forward to both of their presentations. So yeah, if you want to ask questions, it would be great if you could put them. I hope you can all see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you just type any questions into there, we'll try and answer them either typing back, or at the end of the presentations, we'll have a little bit of space for questions. The tool so I will start by sharing the tool. I just need to share this. So this is, sorry about that. Wait a sec. Stop that. Again.
Okay. Stuart's asking, will people be able to see the video after the webinar?
Yes, we're recording it and we'll put it on our website, and they have been going on to the LWA website as well. So yeah, the webinar will be on the resources page on our website and also on the COVID page. So you can also find an Excel version of this tool on our resources page. It's under business planning. So this is, I'm sure you've all seen risk assessments. Thought it would be useful to share this. It's kind of half stolen from a New Zealand farm risk assessment, but it's sort of also a combination of looking at various ones and thinking about what might help. And it's really just, it's maybe a tool that you could sit and go through as a staff team or staff and volunteer team, or with a board if you have one. And some of the sections will not be relevant, and some of them there might be sections that aren't in it that you feel need to be in it. So absolutely, I mean, it's there very much as a kind of just have a look and see if it sort of is useful. And it's really to kind of give it's a focused way of thinking about what might go wrong and what we can do before it does go wrong, to mean that when it does go wrong, it's not quite so badly wrong. So the way to use it is kind of, there's a list of kind of risk. So 0 is no risk, up to 5 is extreme risk. Some risk assessments also give you, you can put in a likelihood of it happening, and then you kind of multiply them, but this is sort of slightly simpler. And then you look at what is the risk, who or what could be affected and how. What do I already do to limit or minimize the risk? What the rating is using that. What else can I do? And then any comments or progress. And you could, in the comments, you could put actions, you could put a time by which the action had to be completed. You could put the kind of revised risk rating once you'd actually done the things that you'd said you might be able to do. And you may well have seen these. They're often used in relation to health and safety. If you've got you probably have all done them in relation to COVID. But so this is more kind of thinking about your business and the stability of your business. Although obviously people are really key, are the most key thing in that. But so I'll just take you through the sections. So there's people, so which is you, your employees, your volunteers, your board, if you wanted to consider them as separate. If you have a board, are you up to date? Are you networked in? Are you well? What about your employees? Are they content? Are they likely to leave? What about your volunteers? And then what happens if someone gets sick? So just kind of thinking through all your staff, volunteers, maybe outside people, if you have somebody that does delivery for you, a grower that delivers extra that you buy in from. What happens if they get sick? Do you have have you thought about that? Do you have a sort of task list that you could say in the top drawer in my desk, or in the top drawer, or stuck on the wall in the packing shed? There's a list of the things that need doing every day if I get sick. And do you have a succession plan? So particularly, I think for CSAs or growers that have a board and where, or active board, what happens when board members want to leave? Production. So do you have data on production? Do you track your crops? Do you track what you put all your animals? Do you track what you put in the ground, how you rear? Do you know where your inefficiencies and efficiencies are? And do all your staff and volunteers know that? Are there capital items, polytunnels, tractors that are nearing the end of their lives, a roof on a barn or a packing shed? Can you replace them? Are you setting aside money to do that? Have you thought about how you do that? Land, is your land secure? Are there threats to its long-term viability? Can you do anything to limit those threats? I know there's one person listening who's probably stamping their feet at this point, who's got potential HS2 coming through their farm. So I feel for you on that one. Logistics, are there people or services that you rely on that would affect your business if something happened to them? So a local shop where you do a big drop-off shutting, a delivery company closing, that kind of thing. Environment. So this is kind of thinking about environmental issues like salinity, acidification, soil erosion. Hopefully not, because you'll all be farming in brilliant ways. But or are they likely to be in the future? And also, is there legislation which might impact on the way you manage your land? So for anyone that gets basic payments, that would be something to think about, although obviously that might end up being positive. Climate. So yeah, do you know what the climate patterns are? And I think Helena will fill us in on this, but do you know, is your farm getting wetter? Is it getting drier? What are the weather patterns? Can you get hold of kind of 100-year weather patterns and look through them and start working out kind of how likely is it you're going to have a drought or a flood? And then can you kind of plan for that? Can you plan that into your budget? Can you plan in losing a load of crop because there's been a massive flood? Economic, so sort of general economy. So is there a change in interest rates likely to happen, or a recession that's going to affect you? What would happen? I mean, we are entering recession. Is there any way that we can think to mitigate against that? Geography. So is your location constraining you? Are you, I mean, I guess for CSAs, often there's not so much desire to expand, but if you did want to expand, is the land you're in going to constrain you? Is there kind of no other land? Are you very remote? Does that affect your business? Yeah, are you sort of at the bottom of a big hill where you couldn't grow? And market and price. So kind of, if you're in horticulture, is there a risk? I mean, obviously Brexit is something to think about. And kind of, yeah, what's happening out there in horticulture? How's that going to affect, what we're able to sell and how we're able to sell? So that's very brief, probably not as brief as I could have been, but we'd be really happy to run a kind of focus group if people are interested in using that tool and maybe sitting down and thinking about it together. Maybe put something in the chat, or also you could email me and we could run an online, just a sort of group meeting session and sit down and think about the different elements of that and kind of jointly look at how we could mitigate against some of those risks. So very happy to do that if that's useful. So without further ado, if you've got any questions, do put them in the Q&A, but I am going to hand over to Katy.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I mean, that was a lot of different things to consider. So, you know, having the prompts on the spreadsheet will be really helpful. Suzy, it says I can't share my screen. Host is disabled. Participant screen sharing. So I'm just going to take you through a bit about growing communities and then give you a couple of examples to kind of identify the types of things that we have had to mitigate against in general and in this year in particular. Because it's been a fun year for everyone all around. Can you see that slideshow now? Yep. Okay, great, thanks. So yeah, we're growing communities. We've been around since 1996. We're based in London, in Hackney, and in the borough of Barking and Dagenham. And yeah, as I said, I'll just tell you about some of our activities first, and some of the shocks that we've kind of worked through this year and what we had in place or didn't have in place that helped us navigate those things in the way that we did. So we are a veg bag scheme predominantly. We have 1,400 members. That's about 1,700 bags of fruit and veg that go out to members every week. And just as an idea of what happened in COVID, as maybe I'm sure many of you found as well, there was a huge kind of surge in interest, and we had 20% more people sign up to the scheme in a fortnight. So it increased up to 1,900 bags in 2 weeks, which was no small thing for our logistics to handle. We also run a farmers market every Saturday. That's in the grounds of a church in Stoke Newington, and it's already quite a tight squeeze for space. So working with the new joy of 2 metre distancing between every customer and stallholder and staff member has been a task. And between these two kind of outlets, we feed 6,000 people a week. We also run some growing sites. So the biggest is our peri-urban farm in Dagenham on the outskirts of London. That grows, all the produce from that goes to our veg scheme. And also we have a patchwork farm in Hackney, which is smaller sites where we grow our Hackney salad and also host volunteers and run growing traineeships every year. Then we have a new kind of arm that was set up literally at the beginning of last year. So is relatively new, is the Better Food Shed, where we kind of aggregated. We realised that so we don't grow all of the produce that we sell. We also buy from farms as close by as possible, suppliers that we've got a good relationship with. And we realised that we were having the same conversations with the same farmers every week as were every other veg box scheme in London that were the same as us. So the Better Food Shed is an aggregator for those orders and deliveries and things. So every week, the Better Food Shed receives and distributes 14 tonnes of produce to our warehouse in Barking. And if you don't know what that looks like, I learned yesterday that if you stacked the crates, it would be as tall as the Shard in London, which is the tallest building in Western Europe, if you haven't seen it yet. So it's a lot of produce, and similarly, when COVID struck, their orders increased by 40% temporarily, which obviously, again, not a simple thing to make happen. And for all of those kind of numbers and huge quantities of things, it's run by 2 of them. One of them was on holiday in France at the time, so. Importance of resilient systems definitely apparent there. Finally, we do a lot of data collection and research and kind of policy report writing and collecting evidence to give to policymakers on what a better food system can be built with and how it can work and how it does work when it already in some places. So Growing Communities has been around for 24 years, which has given us a lot of time to do things wrong and notice and try and do things better. So, and we've fared, as well as we could have this year. And I think we have quite a lot of strong processes that have had time to become well embedded and manageable and kind of well understood by a lot of people in the team. I should say, just for interest, there are probably, I should know this number, there are probably about eight of us full-time equivalents across, a lot of different activities, but we're not a tiny operation, so that helps, but we are, running a lot of different things. So it's not like we all know what each other are doing or what each other's kind of jobs are, but we have had good time to set up strong systems. So some of those are things like we run regular risk assessments. We have a good kind of process for doing that, so that the baseline is kind of safe and well considered and reviewed regularly. We closely monitor all of our kind of data annually, and that's everything from, how much produce are we growing, how much are we selling, what were the profits we made on things, what, how many people did we work with, how many partnerships did we make? You know, we keep a close eye on that. We've just published our annual report yesterday, which is the kind of point in the year where that's the prompt for us to collect all of that information. And we also have well-established kind of processes and policies on many things. So, for example, a clear sick pay policy, which has obviously been helpful this year, and a really important one, a robust online file sharing system that is navigatable and that people can understand, which makes a massive difference in these conversations, just in terms of sharing kind of what everybody needs to know and continuity of kind of knowledge and succession planning and things. We also very closely monitor our logistical data, and that's a bit of a kind of necessity, being the mother of invention, because this is our headquarters in an old fire station. We're actually the bottom left-hand window, so we're one little office, and this yard on the left is where those 1,900 bags are packed over 2 days every week. So it's a really small space. And so we've got limited space to pack, limited space in cold stores, limited space in the vans, limited space at the collection points where bags are collected. So we really, really have to keep close data on, you know, if we're packing 20 extra bags, will they fit? How long is that going to take? How many extra crates is that? And at what point, you know, we have like breaking points in terms of capacity, and that can be quite helpful, I guess, in making you need to think about it. So that's some background about us. And now I'll share a couple of things that we found helpful this spring, kind of to help us stay on track despite massive shocks to our systems and processes. So a really, really key one, I think, which I think that your spreadsheet, Suzy, maybe doesn't kind of have a lot of detail on, so I can share another spreadsheet on that, because in terms of like finding all of the vulnerabilities in your business, you know, chances are, unless you're very small and you do know everything, there might be a lot of things you don't miss if it's not directly your job. So basically, I think staff knowledge is a really big vulnerability for a lot of organizations. Obviously this year, like COVID, sickness absence made it more of an apparent risk for possibly people being away for extended periods, but it can happen at any time with somebody leaving at short notice, or just something unexpected happening while someone's on holiday, or, you know, there's lots of reasons why somebody wouldn't be there when you need them to be there. So it's good to take the time to assess where your organization has kind of pinch points or vulnerabilities. And the biggest question is, who can run your most critical processes, and particularly ones that are time sensitive, so they can't wait for somebody to get back from holiday, or somebody to get better, or somebody to have the time to hand it over. What are the critical things? And it'll be different for everyone. So a big one for us is the kind of complexity of our order. The ordering all of the produce for those bags is definitely not my job, and I'm very glad. And I'm not one of the trained backups, so it doesn't have to make sense to me, because it seems like a huge task. But also things like who can update your website and communications if there's an emergency, or even just in general, who can do your finance processes, even like who has the bank card details if you needed to, you know, spend money to fix something, who knows how to do that, who knows the passwords to things. So online accounts for things, even social media accounts and website kind of logons. Does everybody know where they are? Are they somewhere where, you know, at least a few people can access them if they need to? And I've put here, what could you really not muddle through if it came to it? That's what needs to be kind of noticed before it's an emergency. So for us, when COVID struck, we, as I said, our veg is collected from 15 collection points all around Hackney, and almost overnight, some of them just closed. Some of them are in shops and kind of community places that just closed overnight. And it was clear that others would become, you know, overwhelmed, and we had a huge operation in kind of working out where everybody was going to collect their subscriptions from. And our comms manager was absent and really sick, not able to work. So we had 1,400 members about to set off to collect their bags the next day, and we needed to very quickly make sure they knew what was going to be happening, given particularly how much of a panic everybody was in at the time. So luckily, one of the things that we have is a shared password tracker. So there are plenty of ones you can use. They're kind of online password locker things. So we were able to get the website password, the social media passwords. We actually have a texting service as well. We were able to send a text to members to find that information, and we weren't limited by the fact it wasn't stuck in one person's head. Again, like as I mentioned, the veg order is hugely complicated, and obviously if it doesn't get done, nothing is happening. We don't have a business, and that is predominantly done by somebody who had a slightly higher risk of kind of a sickness absence. So we made sure that others were kind of comfortable and refreshed on how to run that order if they had to. And actually we asked somebody who it was nothing to do with their job at all, but who had done it many years ago, to kind of come and have a refresher, to be a last resort backup. So we had a kind of backups and backups for the backups. Similarly with the farmers market, it is a particularly critical time to run that safely and reassuringly and kind of calmly. So we trained a few backup market managers, just so that we're never in a situation where we either have to cancel the whole market or it's being run by somebody who isn't as experienced as they need to be. So it's just a good idea to think through, like, who knows what and what do they know that others don't know, and particularly in relation to how critical is that information. So we did a lot of just training and making sure that the information was commonly available to everybody if they needed to step in an emergency. And a silly thing, it can be really complicated things like I've mentioned, or it can just be, I've put rare skills. We didn't have many drivers, people who were just happy to drive vans, which obviously is quite a big thing. So it's not always like rocket science skills. It's just things that are quite there aren't many people in your organization who can do it at the drop of a hat. So what we did was we sent a spreadsheet round to all of our kind of area coordinators to get them to think through, okay, what do you do every week, what's critical, and what's what definitely would need covering. So you can see here, and I can send this slide in case it's a helpful prompt for people to think it through. What would definitely need covering if and then we ask this to everybody in the organisation. What would definitely need covering? When does it happen? Who usually does it? Who else currently knows how to do it? And we actually in spring of this year, we're also asking about, at this point, it doesn't matter if they work for Growing Communities at the moment, if they're a volunteer, if they're an ex-employee, if they're somebody who works in a partner organisation who, we have a good relationship with, who could help us out, this week and in future we can help them out. Can it be done from home, or what needs to be sorted to ensure that it can be done from home? And this one, most importantly, what is needed to be able to hand it over to someone else? So are there written instructions already, as Suzy were mentioning? Are they already stuck up somewhere? Fine. In our online sharing system, can you just link to where they are on there so that we know? Would training be required for somebody to really be able to confidently do this? And then just ideas for who else could be trained to do it. And again, it didn't necessarily have to be somebody who works for Growing Communities. Could it be a volunteer who knows the ropes really well? Could it be somebody who used to work for us, or somebody in a partner organisation who could help us out? And then the last two things: what's the impact if this task isn't done for 1 or 2 weeks? So obviously, what is critical is a subjective question. And this kind of links back to Suzy's spreadsheet, where it kind of asks about the risk factors, like, could it destroy the business? Would it be a temporary setback? Would it be a permanent setback? you know, if it doesn't get done for 2 weeks, is that going to really make, you know, make things disintegrate, or is it just going to be really bad, but it'll have to kind of do. Yeah, so that was a really great tool for everyone to be able to think it through and put in kind of good practice to help keep us kind of on top of things. And off the back of this, we then, you know, as I said, realized we needed to train more members of staff to do certain key processes. We needed to refresh instructions that were written. We needed to make sure that, or we got the links for where things were, if, you know, we needed to find them in a kind of bind. Yeah, and kind of outsider offers of help and partnership were cemented as well, which was good. Yeah, we kind of knew who was on hand to do what. So once we knew what needed doing and who could do it, even if not the usual suspects, we also realized we needed to create a staff kind of availability tracker. So I guess the fun thing about COVID is you can, you know, if you're self-isolating, you know someone's going to be off for 2 weeks, you know almost exactly that it's going to be 2 weeks. And for our staff, we could then, you know, we planned that out into the future so that we could see, you know, along with things like annual leave or just, you know, other members of staff who were in the vulnerable group, so they couldn't come and work from the office, or if they were sick, or if they, you know, yeah, were self-isolating, we could see if there were ever going to be crunch points where, like, actually the two people who know how to do it are both going to be not able to do it, you know, at the end of next week, etc. Just so we had a bit of a chance to have forward notice of that happening. And also our pack, the veg pack is run on a rota. So we started surveying people's availability a month in advance and building in kind of, or scheduling buffer, rotoring buffer staff for that as well. So every pack now, I think we kind of ask 3 extra packers to be on standby to be able to step in if several people have to call in sick at short notice. So yeah, that's kind of staff and staff availability and staff knowledge. Then this bit, I know it's a very, very generic slide, but it's really so specific to you and what your situation is and your space and your setup. But basically, yeah, that the spreadsheet that Suzy is sharing, it will be great for just getting you to, in a kind of calm moment, think through, like, actually what really are the weaknesses here and potentially what can be done about them. So as I said, we pack 1,700 bags a week, as well as fulfill some restaurant orders, and these go in hired vans to 15 collection points in Hackney, all of which have all of their own capacity limitations. And we've been tracking all of this really closely in the past so that we could budget staffing, timings for things, but just that things would work. And because we were tracking it so closely and we knew that's always something that has a kind of upper limit for us, we then could notice when we went up to 1,900 bags in a fortnight, and it would only have continued kind of going up in those first panic weeks, that we could notice that wasn't going to be okay and close to new members quickly and before it became, you know, a really unworkable situation. We also had the members who, you know, our current members also increased their bag sizes. We have 8 or 9 different size bags, and a lot of people increased the size of their bag because everybody was working from home and everyone was eating at home more. So just the volume of produce was yeah, quite something to be dabbled with or managed. Yeah, so because we knew how much capacity our system had already, because we'd thought it through before, we didn't get to breaking point, and it didn't become a situation that was really, you know, really a problem and would have been damaging to the business, in terms of we wouldn't have been able to fill all the orders. We would have been working, you know, all through the night. It would have been absolute chaos. So yeah, it's worth getting the modelling in now, or noticing what the issues are now and modeling them, so that you can notice if it's going wrong, and or if you can't quite work it out now, it's at least worth having the information so that you could work it out quickly if you needed to. So there are a lot of spreadsheets that growing communities, which thankfully I'm not very close to, because I would not be good at that. But down to the number of seconds it takes to pack a bag is what some of the rest of the team know. So we had the staff, we could pack the veg, we knew it was the right amount of produce, and then the hire van company closed with a day's notice. And we use these vans for years, and they are what get the produce to all of our collection points. So that was a vulnerability that we didn't really have a backup plan for, and it might be similar for you if you're working with quite big quantities as well. So for us, it turned out we did find another van that we could hire at far greater cost, unfortunately, but it also caused us to kind of catalogue what we had access to in the team. So who had camper vans, cargo bikes, cars, bike trailers, all of those were on a spreadsheet at one point as well. Would you be happy to cycle around Hackney with hundreds of bags of veg on the back of your bike? So it's just knowing what we had kind of in the team already. And a boring one, but kind of can't be skipped over, I don't think, is that obviously a strong community and willingness and goodwill can solve a lot of things, and people will step in when there's a problem, particularly as I'm sure everyone's doing really great things and have a lot of fans. But some situations can only be fixed with kind of costs attached. So if you can have financial reserves of any kind, that is a really good idea. And we have been able to keep running actually really smoothly this year, but it has been really expensive. And we were and are in a kind of strong financial position, so we had the reserves for that to not be terrifying or not be really kind of a potentially business ending problem. So that's mostly it, I think, from me. I think the main things that I could recommend now is just if it feels all a bit much and you don't quite know where to start. I mean, obviously this session is brilliant, and the spreadsheet that Suzy's sharing will be really helpful. But you can also ask other CSAs, other organisations that do similar things, if they have something similar, if they've already done some thinking on this. I'm sure there are forums and kind of networks that are happy to share what they've done. And similarly, if you've built something that works, just send it to someone for them to possibly use. Somebody in COVID sent me a risk assessment kind of spreadsheet that they'd made. And I was so grateful. We already had our own, but I was so grateful they'd taken the time to be like, we've made this. It was complete hassle to make. Here it is if it's useful to you. So if you've got something that does work, definitely share it with some friends. And the final thing is just to review it regularly as well. So obviously if you can do it outside of when it's actually a problem, that's great. I know what life is like. It's never going to be the first thing you wake up wanting to do across everything else on your to-do list. But if you can notice them in a calm moment, it will really pay off. And the only other thing is to review it regularly. So, some of the instructions that we did have written down actually were a bit out of date, or, could have been tweaked. So if you can put a date in to review them regularly as well, then that's a really good idea too. So that's all from me. I think, Suzy, do we have time for questions now, or are we saving them to the end?
No, we've got time for questions now. Thank you. That was fantastic. And I'm going to take some of those things and add them into the spreadsheet, because there's loads of other excellent suggestions. So thank you for that too. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A, and please, if you do have a question that is too kind of wordy to type, you can raise your hand or put something into chat and I can let you speak, I think. But the two questions in Q&A are, what do you use for your file sharing system? And the other one is, why do you use hired vans rather than buying them? But please do add other questions, people.
So for our file sharing system, we actually have Microsoft licenses. So we use Office 365 and SharePoint, but Google Drive is also excellent, and obviously free. Yeah, and I've got Better Food Traders, who we're a member of. I know they are solely based on Google Docs, and it's much of a muchness. It's perfectly good. And you can just set your permissions so that, you know, documents are available to whoever you choose for them to be available to. So set email addresses and things. They don't have to be, you know, obviously not completely public, but yeah, everybody who needs to can see them. And why don't we own vans? We would love to own vans. We don't really have space to own one at the moment. We're actually applying for, well, we have many times and are continuing to apply for money to get an electric van that we can use in Hackney. Yeah, I think it's just always been an expense and a logistical thing that we haven't got room to store, and we only use a van a day and a half a week. So yeah.
Thanks, Katy.
There was another question. Peri-urban. So the Dagenham farm is peri-urban. It's just on the very edge of an urban area. So it's in Dagenham, which is the very outskirts of London. Thank you.
If you have more questions for Katy or something occurs, you can put it. Oh, there's another message in chat. Oh, it's Stuart saying thank you. Yeah, do put more questions in. I mean, yeah, if you've got something else you want to ask Katy, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well. So thanks, Katy. And I'm going to hand over to Helena, who's going to talk about climate change and what we can grow.
Great stuff. So I'm just going to get my slideshow up because technology's not awesome. So you could just bear with me a few seconds and see if we can work it. Let's go to the end of the thing. Right, here we go. So can we see that? Can we see that? Yeah, good. Got some nodding. That's what we like to see. I might even make it large so you can see it. There we go. So Helena and I work at Q. So I'm in a slightly different position to the rest of you guys. I guess my role, I run the kitchen garden. And I work quite closely with some of our scientists as well, which is really nice development recently. And my role, as I see it, at Q is growing the veg and speaking to the public and education. But what's really nice for me is if I have crops that fail, my livelihood isn't at risk. So I can really experiment with what I'm growing. You know, I can grow lots of different things. I can grow lots of little things. And that I think is really useful in this conversation because I'm not financially concerned about that. And I think that gives me a different point of view. And that's kind of where this is coming from, because I'm really interested in trying to grow crops that will sort of thrive through the next kind of bumps in the road. And this is kind of a bit of a chat about what I've been doing, where we're at with it. And I guess the next step is seeing if we can do that on a larger scale. And if people will eat them, which is a whole other kettle of fish. So a very quick thing. So this is climate change and how we can grow to look at it, which is one of the risks that was mentioned right at the beginning. So very, very quickly, I think we all know what climate change is as we can describe it, but just very quickly, it is a result of carbon dioxide that we released basically after the Industrial Revolution, so it's kind of our fault. And since then, we've increased the temperature of the Earth by about 1.5 degrees. And that has had a massive knock-on effect. And we are trying to stop that temperature rise where it gets to about 2 degrees, so fingers crossed for that. So the effects of that, it's not simple. It's not as simple as saying this is the one effect that it's had. I think we can all say what has happened is an instability has occurred. And when weather events happen, they are massive. I mean, this winter, well, even the last few weeks, I mean, it hasn't stopped raining. It just hasn't stopped raining. And I work in London, a really dry part of the world. I used to work in Essex and everyone was like, oh, you've moved to the driest part of the country, and it just didn't stop raining. Or we have drought for 6 weeks and 36 degrees all of a sudden. So it's really intense. And the wind this year as well has been another battle for me. So it's sort of, it just seems to be very intense and very unpredictable. And I think that's what we have to prepare for. It's basically risk assessing for our veg. Can it take whatever is going to get thrown at it? Because we're not getting these steady periods of temperatures or weather or pretty much anything. Of course, a knock-on effect of that is also the pests and diseases are changing, and they will sort of also be ebbing and flowing with these, the heat, and all of a sudden everything's recreating. The aphids love a bit of warm, and they seem to know it's coming, and they just, all of a sudden it's 32 degrees and I've got aphids everywhere. Working in a public garden, everyone will also tell me I've got aphids everywhere. Best thing you can ever do, work in a public garden, you'll know where your pests and diseases are because everyone will point them out to you. So I guess what this kind of comes down to is all the traditional crops that we are growing in the UK aren't thriving. They're growing. I think that's fair to say. They are growing, but they're not all thriving. And we have a food issue. I work a little bit with some food banks, and one of our local ones said they've had 400% rise in people using food banks. There are more people that need food. Obviously, part of that has come from the pandemic, but I think we are a growing population. We need to be able to feed ourselves. So we need to achieve food security, and that might not come from growing the crops that we have traditionally grown. So just a quick one with DEFRA, their description of food security is access to sufficient, safe, sustainable and nutritious food at affordable prices, which could be an interesting one over the next few years. So I title this Climate Resilient Crops, and what do I mean by that? And this is what I mean by it. I'm sure you can find another definition, but it is a crop that can withstand these changes and hopefully thrive. That is quite important. A lot of our crops will sit there, like lettuce will sit and it'll be all right, and then all of a sudden it will give up because it's decided it's suddenly too hot or it's suddenly too windy. It doesn't thrive in the way it maybe wants to. Although actually I'm pretty lucky with lettuce, but things like my brassicas haven't been doing particularly well at all, and my root crops are becoming more of an issue. So the reason we're talking about this now is so that we can experiment, or people like me can experiment, or people like you guys can take a small amount of land and have a go with a new crop, so to see if it works for you in your individual climates, because I know that where I'm growing is very different. There was someone from up in Leeds, where I've got my family live, and they have massively different growing conditions to what I do. So it's worth investigating what works for you. But it's really worth investigating now so we can start experimenting and breeding these crops so that we don't come into an Irish potato famine situation where they were so reliant on potatoes that because there was nothing else that they were growing, when they lost that one crop, there was famine. Now, we're lucky we probably won't ever come to that again. We have a really good polyculture. We have lots of imports, but we don't want to rely on that. I feel like we don't want to rely on that. So I feel like now is the time to start experimenting, to start having a go. And hopefully then if we ever lose something like potatoes, if light becomes too prevalent, if spraying for them, which we don't like to do, but if we had to, we have to feed ourselves, hopefully we would have another crop that could back that up. So in terms of where you could find climate resilient crops, there's several different areas to look at. For the UK, which is definitely getting hotter, we can look at crops that are already growing in other warmer climates and see if they will grow with us, which we still have issues with our light levels, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Crop Wild Relatives, which is actually a project that's just finished at Kew, where we've been out and looked at those crops or relatives of our cultivated crops that are growing in the wild. And the reason we're looking at those is all those lovely crops that you guys are growing have basically had all the resilience spread out of them so that they taste really good or they look really good. They're not, your beetroots aren't long and knobbly and don't have a really thick skin anymore, but they also don't necessarily have the resilience to not bolt when it gets hot or these kind of traits. So we've gone out and tried to collect seed from the wild relatives that have been thriving in the wild. So have obviously managed to cope and have built up resistances to the weather conditions they're under. So then we can hopefully come back and look at breeding those with some of our more normal crops or some more cultivated crops to try and breed some of that resilience back in. That obviously means that there is a chance that we will lose some of the flavour. And I think something it is worth thinking about, which is not necessarily going to come from us, maybe our chefs, and I work quite closely with some chefs as well, is sometimes we have to think about food as calories, as sustenance, not always about flavour, which I know is another way of thinking at it. But it'd be lovely to say that we can always choose what we eat by what we like. And I hope this never happens, but we also have to plan for a point where we might have to eat to survive, just every now and again. Hopefully we never get there. I'm really hoping we never get there. That's the end. But, you know, we don't want to be there. But so breeding in some of the resilience might lose some of the flavour options. As far as I'm concerned, if you can put garlic in the pan, you'll probably be all right. So that's one thing we can look at. And some of the crops I'm going to talk about are wild. They aren't cultivated. They are still the straight species. But obviously to get them to be suitable for our climate, we have to breed them a little bit. Perennial crops and forest gardening, I think, is one of the answers. And I don't think there is one answer. I don't think there's one of these categories that's going to be the answer. I think there's a little bit of everything. The more different solutions we have, the better we are resilient. You know, having one answer isn't resilient. Being resilient is having lots of different answers, lots of different suppliers, working as a group, you know, and I think that's the answer. So I think perennial crops are a massive answer. I mean, in the spring, they're amazing. They just do it. I love them because they're just there all the time. And I don't have to put any energy into them. So they are great, but also they give quite a lot. And I think forest gardening is a really interesting answer as well. But it's not the answer. I think it's part of a system of answers. And then very lastly, heritage crops. I think it's worth looking back. So I grew in what was once a Georgian kitchen garden. And I look back at what they were growing, and it's a lot of the crops. I'm like, oh, look at this new exciting crop I'm growing. And the Georgians are going, yeah, we were growing that a long time ago. So they're often growing things to show off because it needed heat, it needed extra care, but we've now got that heat naturally. So sometimes it's worth looking back to see if they were growing something. They were growing sweet potatoes, they were growing one of the crops I'm going to look at, Oxalis tuberosa. They're growing all these things, and they were mainly showing off to go, look at us, we can grow them, but we can actually grow them now. So they're just things to have a little think about. I'm going to mainly look at crops from hotter climates because that's what I've mainly been experimenting with. But I always kind of have a little think about all these things when I look at them. I think it was there. Right, so I'm going to mainly look at root crops. I have a much more extended talk, but we'll keep it on roots. The reason for this is probably the crop that I have the biggest problem with currently, unless we talk about brassicas, but it makes me cry, and I end up ranting about pigeons for about 20 minutes, so we'll stick to root crops. So the biggest issue for me is main crop potatoes. We get blight quite regularly, or at least blight warnings, and hopefully I'm sure you all sign up to the Potato Council where you can get blight warnings, and I get them very daily over these kinds of summers going, you're going to get blight, you're going to get blight. And again, I also have the sound warning of visitors. They will tell me if they think I've got blight, often. So it is an issue, and the potato is such a high calorific crop. So if it came back down to it, we need to have something that's going to feed us. And I know that sounds like end of the world type of talk, but I think it's important to think about that as well. So it's the third most important food crop in the world. And as I say, the biggest issue is blight. I think I'm with fairly experienced growers here, so I won't go massively into blight, but it is increasing due to the warm, wet weather, which we are getting more and more of. It'll get to 36 degrees. And I think I got in May, I think I was at 32, and then it rained for days, and I got really lucky actually that I didn't get it this time, but I actually got it this year at the end of the season, sort of August time. But I don't grow main crop potatoes, so I don't know if I didn't get it on my potatoes, just my tomatoes. So my current solution is I only grow the early potatoes. I get early blight, which isn't actually affect them too badly, at least not on my level of growing, but I don't grow main crops because they just drive me up the wall. So I'm trying to find something to replace that main crop, the storage tuber, the thing that's going to give me the starchy bit on my plate over the winter. So these are what I've been trying out. So just very quickly on the potato, the history of the potato is an Andean crop, which is really important because a lot of the ones we are trying are from the Andes. When it first came over, we had a lot of issues with it. It didn't start producing tubers till the sort of September. So we have this issue with a lot we're looking at now. It's called it was originally what we call a short day plant, which is quite important as to why a lot of what I'm trying isn't there yet. And that means it doesn't start producing tubers until the days are shorter than the nights. Plants are really, really clever. They can actually measure light amounts, and that's how they breed chrysanthemums all year round. And it's like torturing plants. And if you want to read about it, go for it. But it makes you cry a little bit. So that was bred out of these slowly, and they're now what we call day neutral. So they start producing tubers whenever we put them in the ground, basically. They're still not frost hardy, but we managed to get a good crop. So basically, from the potato entering the country into now, we've bred what we need into them, which might be partially why they're not so resilient to blight. Although where they're traditionally grown in the Andes, they're grown, there's sort of 5 or 6 different types of solanum root that are grown together, so that even if they get one that goes down, they often get another few that will survive. Excuse me. So oca is probably my favourite, and I think it's becoming more and more common, which is really good. So oca is another Andean crop, or Oxalis tuberosa, if anyone wants to go for a bit of Latin. I stick them in there because common names for me, I'll say one thing and then I'll get someone going, oh, I thought oca was this, or I thought it was that, or so that's why the Latin's there, not for any other reason, not to be annoying, but just so you know what I'm talking about. So it's quite a small little tuber at the minute because it doesn't start producing, I think, until the end of September. I think it's 13 hours. So we start getting 13-hour day lengths about the end of September, but it's not hardy. So I had 2 frosts just last week and the foliage is gone. So it's had really only just over 2 months to really start producing those tubers. So it's a really lovely little crop. It's one of my favourites, actually. It has quite a lemony flavour. It's oxalis. It has oxalic acid in it, which gives you like a lemony, sorrely flavour. But very, very edible. Stores really well, actually. You can store it for a year. Not that I've ever had any that made it that long, but they store really well. They store exactly the same as you store a potato. And although I say they're small, they're probably coming sort of, I'm getting big ones now that I don't know if you can tell on screen, probably about like 7-8 centimetres, so enough that it's worth growing. And in the UK, we have a fantastic group of people called the Guild of Oca Breeders, who are actually trying to breed a bigger and bigger type of oca, and you can actually get involved with that if you wanted to. And it's a really complicated process because they have all kinds of things in the way that stops us breeding them. They've got like 3 different outbreeding solutions. No wonder they're so good at growing. So they're very beautiful as well. They have that kind of sort of 3-leaf foliage, which is also edible, which is also really good, I think, if you can have a crop where you can get 2 different harvests out of it. Obviously, don't eat all the foliage, you'll get no tubers. But it's just, I add it to the salad bags I take to the kitchens really, really often. So you do get 2 crops out of that. And if you do salad bags, there's a few of these that you can just add the occasional leaf into those bags, and that's quite useful. So it thrives in full sun. It will grow in some shade, which is quite useful. But if you're really growing it to sort of produce, I would put it in full sun. It doesn't take up too much room. And as I said, they can be stored for quite a long time. So I think this is quite an interesting one. It's high in carbs, it's high in fibre, it's high in vitamin C. So it's a good crop for eating. The chefs really like cooking with it. And I will talk about the chefs a little bit on and off because we work with, I work with the chefs at work, but also the Chef's Manifesto, which is part of Food Forever, if you have come across those. And I think one of the stumbling blocks between me sitting here going, yeah, I've got this fantastic crop and I really like it, is then you present it in one of your food bags, or you try and give it to the public, you try and sell it, and it's, unless they know what it is or what to do with it, it often doesn't, they don't want it. So I think we have to think as a whole chain of people and kind of like, we need to be able to grow it, because I often have my chefs coming over to me going, can you grow this X, Y, and Z? And I'm going, no, I actually can't grow it. Not in this climate, not without so much input that it's not worth growing. I also don't have a glass house, so that puts that out. But we have to make it so that they can present it, they can cook it, so that people know what to do with it. Thankfully, the oca is very much like a potato, except slightly lemony, so you mash it and roast it and boil it, and you can eat it raw, although I'm not a massive fan of that. So I think talking about the whole supply chain is really, really important. Cool, I'm going to move on. I will answer all the questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone, but I won't forget. Mashua, which is the bigger white tuber, which is a climbing nasturtium, Tropolium tuberosum. Another Andean crop. We like the Andean crops because they have very similar kind of weather patterns to us, so we quite like them. Again, it's a short day plant, which is one of the issues with the Andean crops, but they found one at Wisley called Ken Aslet, or they called it Ken Aslet, which they think is either neutral or starts producing early enough you get quite large tubers. So you get these pretty white ones. We can actually get a few different colours. It's a nasturtium, so it's kind of got that cabbagey flavour. I don't know if anyone harvests nasturtiums, and if you don't, you should. They're one of my favourite things, and just the flowers and the leaves, and so good. So again, this has got edible flowers and leaves, and it climbs. So it's a really good use of space because it's up. So you can get quite a lot out of a space. I really love climbers. I kind of grow all my climbers in between my courgettes and things like that. So you actually get a really good, it's not three sisters, but it's a good use of space. I don't have a lot of growing space, so the more the merrier. It's quite a large root, but it doesn't store particularly long. I think I managed to store them for, I've said here 6 months. That's what I've sort of read and heard. I've only managed to store them for, I think, 3 months, but that's not bad going. They just get a little bit soft. But I think they're good, and they stay in the ground. They will stay in the ground. Again, they got hit by the frost, but they haven't gone down yet. I haven't been at work for a few days, so I have no idea what's going on right now. They're really high in vitamin C and protein, which is for a root crop, so they're quite a good one. Not massively high in kind of starch, but still a good kind of potato substitute, I think. And pretty, which is, again, always really, really useful. So that's another one I'd have a go with. A lot of people don't seem to like the flavour. I'm not a chef, as anyone that comes near me will tell you. But again, just put some harissa paste on it, cook it in garlic, put some butter on it. It's going to be okay. But have a go with it. This one and okra are the two. If you're going to say to me, what should I have a go with? These are the two that I would say, have a go. See if your customers will buy them. I believe there's a large supermarket chain that's going to have a go with okra. So once they start having a go with it and making it, and I think that chain has quite a famous chef involved with them, so that will help. Also, I imagine if it's just starting out, you guys might be able to get a higher price for them. I don't know, you never know, give it a go. Both these crops have withstood everything that's been stood at them this year. So the kitchen garden's been running. I've also been, because we were down by a lot of staff, I haven't really given it the attention I normally would, and these guys have just thrived. I start both the crops off in the glass house just to give them a little bit of a longer growing season, or undercover. But I did that for the first time this year, and I haven't dug them up yet, so I don't know how it's affected the crops. But I haven't done in the past and had really good yields. And they have put up with the winds, the rains, the neglect from me. I don't feed them. I don't feed anything, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't feed them. Sometimes I weed them, but the guys that go up don't need weeding, and the guys that sit on the ground don't need weeding because they get so much foliage that they're kind of quite resilient to that. They're just what I would call good doers. They just get on with it, and they store. So I don't need to buy new produce every year. I don't need to buy new seed. They so far haven't had any pests and diseases, so I'm really happy. I'm super happy. Have a go with these guys. So two of the Andean crops, yacon. I get quite a good harvest out of this. It started appearing in the shops as a sweetener, so it's related to the sunflower and Jerusalem artichokes. It's very sweet, and one of the reasons people like it is it has an indigestible sugar, so they use it as a sweetener, but it also has the effect that Jerusalem artichokes have. It's indigestible sugar. It's got to do something, but it's quite nice. Tastes, I think when you first harvest it, it tastes a bit like a water chestnut, and I quite like it in stir fries. And as you kind of cure it, make it sweeter, then it also kind of gets a little bit sweeter and kind of less watery. It's one I'm trying. It's one the scientists absolutely adore because they've got loads of other experiments going on with it. I'm not sure it's quite the point where you could sell it yet, but I like it as something to try. This other guy on here is Uluku, and it's here actually as a bit of a warning shot. It was really popular, and I think you can see why. So beautiful. I mean, you can imagine those little pearly tubers being served up. But sadly, Uluku came to the UK with a bit of a disease, and DEFRA in 2017 asked everyone to stop growing it or stop saving their own. It had, I'm going to make sure I get it right, I think it's a tymovirus, which basically is like mosaic viruses, but it affected cucurbitaceae, amaranthacea, solanaceae. So all these crops I'm talking about, we need to be a bit wary with them. Obviously, check phytosanitary certificates, and for those that don't know, that's all changing in January, so just check your suppliers, please. Obviously, check DEFRA, because the last thing we want to do is try one of these beautiful new crops just to take down everything else around it. So other clue currently, I think we've got some producers that have disease-free, so make sure you're buying disease-free. And then if you see anything, you know, this is why I'm in a lucky position. If I see anything, we have a quarantine lab on site, I just take it in there and they tell me what I've done wrong this time, and I can just dig it up. So it's just a little word of warning, because I get really excited and then everyone goes off and plants everything and then comes back and says, oh, I've got diseases. Just monitor, just little bits to start with. Monitor what you're doing. I know you're all running these massive farms and this might seem a bit of a stretch, and that's why I'm kind of having a go with it. But monitor what you're doing, and if it's going wrong, deal with it fast before you lose everything else. So there's sort of the Andean crops. Sweet potato, we've all heard of sweet potato. I am having a lot of success with sweet potatoes, finally. So I think I'm not going to go on about them for too long, but they're a really good crop for having a go with, and they're a really good replacement for the potato. Takes that extra bit of effort at the end where you have to cure them, because otherwise they're just a bit of an orange potato. But I think they're worthwhile, and I think, again, they're not, because they're convolvulaceae, they're not getting the solanaceae issues, they're not getting blight. To date, I've had no problems with my sweet potatoes, apart from when a mouse, I got a really big one and a mouse decided to live in it for a season, and I didn't know that till I dug it up, but, you know, I don't think DEFRA's going to tell me to stop growing it on behalf of that. So I think they're a crop we should look at. They're really good for starch, they're really good for fibre, they're really, really good replacement. And there are more and more being bred that are particularly for the UK. So I often get an issue with having quite large ones, and like only 2 or 3. But this year I tried a cultivar called Benita and had a really good success. She's curing at the minute, so we're going to see what she tastes like. So keep trying them, and the more that we try them, the more we can work together as a community to get crops that are resilient. But another one that I just popped it in the ground and forgot about it, and it's done really, really well. So sounding very lazy, aren't I? Just pop them in the ground, come back in October, see what's going on. And then the last one I'm going to talk about for long, and we'll go to questions, is these little guys, which have been growing in the UK for absolutely ages, but they're growing in China from the 13th century. Called Chinese artichokes, but they're a little stachys, which is that furry leaved plants, which is in all ornamental displays. They're not massive, they're probably only about yay big, sort of like 7-8 centimeters so far. They aren't day length affected by it, so they start growing quite early on. Very pretty, and they're basically lots of little nutty flavoured roots, which are really, really delicious. And you get quite a lot of little ones, which can be annoying, but it's a good crop. And I think whoever's in Kirkstall saying they get quite a lot of flooding. This will take waterlogging. I mean, I don't know what kind of flooding you're getting up there, but this is a crop that will tolerate it and keep growing through it. So it's something you could look at. Hasn't gone down with the frost, although it is frost tender. It takes a few frosts to take it down, and it will live in the ground over the winter. So I have put the bottom there. Some of these are hard to get rid of once you've got them. That is the only caveat to some of these, but you can manage it. I've always managed it. Just pop some squash over there if you're having problems, and they'll get rid of everything. But these are a crop that I quite like, that they come back. I actually grow them in an ornamental border as well. I'm quite into kind of things that look good and taste good, but I'm selling to the public a little bit as well about growing different things. So this is another little crop that I really like. And it's just one of those really delightfully quite refreshing things in autumn when you're eating quite stodgy dinners. So yeah, that's the last one I'm going to look at. There's a few here kind of that you can have a go with, things like dahlias and arrowroot, which is it's not arrowroot the powder, it's actually canna. If you're one of those big things that are in tropical displays, big cannas, they have edible roots. I'm trying these two for the first year ever, and I will tell you right now that I have definitely read that they are edible but not necessarily tasty. I'll give you my opinion when I've had a go and dug them up. Another one we have is American groundnut, which is prolific. Anyone's got a peanut allergy needs to be really, really careful. It's in the legume family, but quite useful, and it's not particularly tasty, but it's so abundant that it's quite nice in kind of winter stews and things like that. So I'm quite enjoying it. It's a climber, so really, really good use of space. And yeah, you get a lot of these little kind of little tubers on strings. It's very pretty, actually. So have a go with things and have a read around. And I use plants for a future database a lot to see if things will grow, if they are edible. have a go with a little bit of it, I think would be my take home here. Just a little patch, see if it works, see if it's tasty, and see if there's a market out there for it at the minute. But start experimenting now, so that in 15, 20 years time, we have an answer, rather than trying to get an answer in 20 years time and we can't grow things. And the same goes for all the other crops as well, leaves, which I have a lot of issues with. So, I can't grow lettuce in the middle of summer anymore, it's far too hot. But things like amaranth, callaloo, doing really, really well. Brassicas, I'm not going to go there, but I'm having some issues. I'm finding perennial brassicas a better solution than some of the other guys have got. So have a look around and try different crops. And I think that's the answer to now. And that helps you be more resilient because you're not relying on one crop alone. So I'll have a look, see if I can find the answers or questions. I've got to stop sharing my screen. Sorry, everyone. Cool. Right. Perfect. So lots of things were bam. Question and answer. There we are. Sorry, everyone. Would okra grow well in a polytunnel? Yes, it would. I've never grown it in polytunnel. I think the only thing you have to be careful of is condensation. I'm not sure it'd be a massive fan of that. But it should grow really well, and it gives you that extra time to experiment with, to see if you can get the extra, because you won't get the frost. So you should be able to keep it going for quite a long time and see how big you can get those tubers. But yeah, it should do. You can buy okra tubers from a lot of certified places. I get mine from Pennard Plants. I did. You can also get them from Otter Farm. But a lot of them, I think veg growers would like to answer the question. I don't know what's going on with my screen. Sorry. Go for it. Oh, no, that's fine. Sorry. What sort of yield to get the sweet potato? So not perfect at the minute. I have to say, I tend to get a large amount of kind of one or two really big ones. But from one slip this year, say this bonita, I've got a picture, I haven't put it on, but so we're looking for sweet potato sized tubers. From one slip I got, I think I got 8 or 9 tubers, which isn't loads, but the space it took up was only about 50 by 50, and I grow them on top, and you can actually again climb them. I'm going to try yielding them. So I didn't weigh them. I haven't weighed them yet because I haven't cured them. But 8 or 9 tubers from one slip, you can produce your own slips much more easily than anyone gives it credit for. So I would say maybe have a go with them and then charge everyone a fortune when you only get 10 out of the ground. That's what I would say. Just, raffle them off. But yeah, bonita I found really, really good. I still don't do very well with Beauregard, and I don't know if it's just me. And I had one a few years ago called something like T165, a very flashy name, which I think now has been renamed, and that worked quite well. So see what works for your area. They do like quite a lot of water, so that might be why I'm not getting great. And I've also, having it mounding them, apparently that's the way to make them stop doing what is happening. I think because they get a little bit pot bound, I think that's been my issue. So I'm going to keep going. But bonita, I'm going to keep saying it. So happy this year. I ran around screaming. All my visitors are like, I don't know what's going on. Have you got a website? It's a Facebook page where we see what's going on. So I'm on Instagram. That's where I post bits and pieces, and also if anyone wants to get in contact, I'm super happy. It's a community thing. I learn as much every time I do these things. I learn as much as I give, hopefully, and it's great at work as well. There's a lot of conversation happening. The scientists are great. They have no idea about cultivation, which is always quite interesting, but they're also really interested in, a lot of them work in amazing countries where they're coming back and saying, well, this grower over in Colombia is doing it is this way. Can you have a go doing it this way? So it's got to be a conversation. There's no point keeping stuff to yourself. And on Instagram, I will put if things go wrong, which is also so important. Like, don't hide it when things go wrong, because we all want to know if things are going wrong for each other. It sounds bad, but sometimes it's nice to know it's not just you that's had. I remember a few years ago I had a pea cultivar and they all failed, and I was like, right, that's it. I can't grow vegetables. I can't even germinate peas. And had a conversation with someone else, and she's like, no, I had that same pea cultivar and it didn't grow. So communication is so important, and not just even within your kind of little, I speak to other kind of public garden veg growers, but it's also talking to the chefs and talking to people that are doing it on a bigger scale, and I've got a friend who grows carrots for a very large supermarket, and we all have the experiences that link in. So I'm on Instagram. There's a few other really good people to follow if you're interested in these sort of things. But just keep the conversation going, and yeah, good and bad, I think, is what we should share. Cool.
I wanted to ask Helena, one was if you could just put is it the Plants for the Future website in?
Yeah, sure.
And also whether you are connected in with kind of the Seed Sovereignty Network with people who are looking at like breeding seed in the UK, and yeah.
So I have to I've lost my screen. I'm not massively, because, but I am trying to be. So in terms of my professional kind of where I grow, we are a quarantine site. So it means everything has to have a certain element of either risk assessment before it comes in, risk assessment, sorry guys. But on a personal level, I've always kind of grown, a lot of, I really believe in crops that have been grown in this country. So seed that's grown here. So no, not massively involved, but I met them and came across them at the Oxford Food Real Farming Conference a few years ago, and it's something I want to get more into. So yeah, I've got a lot of learning to do, but we're hoping the next step in terms, it's not quite seed sovereignty, but we're hoping to trial some of the sort of plant resilient crop bread, the crop mobility bread stuff. So hopefully when that starts coming out, and then we can have more of a conversation with growers in the UK as well. So I am pushing where I work to try and get that communication started, and the lady that runs the quarantine is very good and wants to be involved in that. It's just how we set it up. Being part of a government body has its pluses and minuses.
I also wondered whether you knew of anyone doing sort of similar, I mean, it sounds like you've done some, but doing work like this around flooding and flood resistance, because that's obviously a bit, particularly further north in certain areas, that's a massive issue.
I haven't done a lot of work. I have to they get flooded often because I don't turn the irrigation off. But that's not the kind of flooding. I work on the opposite, like the driest old riverbed. I mean, in a way, it's really beautiful. So I grew up in quite a claggy, wet area. So to be able to come down and grow carrots finally is a dream. Brassicas, again, like they like that clay. They don't like the flooding, but they like that kind of dampness. I haven't done a lot of work with it. And I don't know many people off the top of my head, so I apologize for that. But those guys that were growing, like, talk to us. I think that's where it starts as well. Like, what is working for you guys? Very techniques, I think mounding and raising veg seems to be working quite well. As I say, one of the resources I do have access to is the scientists that come back, or the plant hunters that come back from other countries that are dealing with these issues, and how they're managing it. Because I mean, we've got waterlogging, but some people have been dealing with that for 30, 40, 50 years. So I'm not being really helpful right now, but again, like, I've got the ability to be able to ask people, so I can try and ask people if that's a real kind of topic.
Great, thank you. And I just wondered whether anyone else has a question about anything we've talked about this evening, because I think there's one more question in the Q&A, which is that you mentioned some other people on Instagram that participants could potentially follow, which if there are, maybe they could go in chat. But does anyone else have another question? Okay, are there any or many other tubers we could be trying out?
Yes, there are, and I'm just typing in, if I say this out loud, I'm going to sound silly, Riz Owen on Instagram. He's the man to follow. So he, obviously it's a play on rhizome, so I don't know how he says it, but he's fascinating, and he's doing a lot more than I'm doing. I always look at it and go, oh, I wonder if I could go, I'm just going to go steal his garden. I think he's going to, I think he's growing down in Devon, so he's got different growing conditions, but wetter growing conditions. I've got a few friends that go down at Rosemore, and I go on about rain, and they're like, no, that is not rain, Yes, someone's talking about the whole plant. I think that's another movement we've got to look at just very briefly. Like, we throw away a lot. We shouldn't throw anything away. Pretty much everything's edible on plants, and we need to look at that as a, you guys are growing, and you can sell your carrot tops and your carrots separately, and you should be, if you can. There's a very fancy pants shop near me that sells nettles for £3 a bunch. So it's all part of the same story. So I think I don't have all the answers, and I know it's very easy for me. I'm not financially not financially concerned, but it's not make or break for me. But there are a lot of things I'm seeing going, wow, we need to be looking outside the box and trying to persuade people they want to eat the nettles and the dandelions. I think dandelions are one of the nicest crops. And I think it's just getting the two-way thing. So the Chef's Manifesto, the Food Forever, I think they're doing such a fantastic thing in terms of getting these crops out there as something we want to eat. So if you've got anyone near you, have a look at Food Forever and Chef's Manifesto. If there's a chef near you that you think you can maybe link up with even, have those conversations. I mean, this is one of the joys of the internet, is we can now research and find people really, really easily, I think, anyway.
Helena, I was going to ask, the Plants for a Future database, does that have a function to be able to search by, like, does well in drought, does well in...
It doesn't at the minute, no, which is a real shame. It's I was just trying to find the website actually for everyone. Here we go, faff. I call it faffing, which is very annoying to everyone. I'll put it in the the chat bit. There's not, no, but maybe that's the next step. Maybe we can persuade him. That's what, because we've got this database. Yes, but if they've got, if you've got databases and they've got tags, this is where I'm very lucky. My partner is really good with computers, unlike me. And he goes, well, actually, there's only the next step. If only one step away from having this database, it then becomes accessible. Sadly, we need these tech people to make it work. But again, like, it all makes it go round. And apparently they need feeding too. So, feed them, they do our technology. It's all going to be all right. I don't know if anything else has come up in the Q&A there.
Yeah, there's a couple.
Okay. Don't know what we're doing for time. I can answer them later though. If I can just type in the box if you guys want to.
No, we've got about 9 more minutes, so that should be fine for 2 questions and probably another one if anyone has one.
Cool. So the other tubers trying out, I think I've mentioned quite a few that I'm having a go with. I'm having a go with the cinnamon vine next year, which could be quite interesting. Again, I'm really into my vines. I've had a go with tiger nuts this year. I'm about to see what my harvest is like, and that's kind of a grass-like plant. I will put all these on my little Instagram, which sounds like I'm desperate for followers, but it's my only real output that I can keep up to date with. I also had a go with Lathyrus tuberosus, like it's a tiny little pea type tuber. So I'm quite excited to dig these guys up and eat them, or force feed people to eat them. So there's a few things, but have a look at Rizoin, or however he decides to pronounce it. And do I have any crops that I recommend for drought conditions? Everything I've grown, so the oca and the mashua, they seem to be really good with drought, which I like, because I don't have the best access to watering at all. I only have overhead watering, and once they've got a leaf on them, they really do not get any water. So those two do quite well. The sweet potato not so well, but it just seems to tolerate periods of drought. So I think I get about 6 weeks of what I would term drought now, where I have to water, and I am horrendous at watering. It seems like such a waste, and a lot of them are quite harsh on my crops. I feel like they can cope, and if they can't cope, I'm not going to grow them again. So I think all those 3 are pretty good. The Stachys affinis is surprisingly copes quite well with drought, considering it also tolerates flooding. So it's quite a good little crop, but it doesn't do so well when it gets drought. It doesn't get such big sort of little tubers underneath there. Cool.
I have another question. Just quickly, you said it's often too hot to grow lettuces in the summer anymore, and you've said that callaloo work well instead, and one other.
Oh, the amaranth family, anything sort of the big amaranth So I have trainees who grow them because they always end up doing these projects where they want beautiful plants. They also grow plants that seed everywhere. Thanks, guys, if you're all watching. But it's a great crop in a way because I'm eating my weeds. So anyone that has ever grown amaranth may regret it, but you get it for years and years after. But actually, when I'm weeding, I just they harvest off, go straight to the kitchen, and the kitchen are really happy. So anything in the Amaranthacea family. Again, when it comes to leaf crops in the summer, it's things like chard. I mean, we love chard. Who doesn't love chard? It's a great plant. But don't forget beetroot leaves. And I know you guys all know all this, but carrot leaves. I really like sorrels. So buckler leaf sorrel, which is a perennial. It does really well in the shade, which is great because I have quite a few trees. So they grow under there really, really well. But yeah, lettuce is great at the beginning and end of the season. I get a really extended season. I mean, I can grow lettuce till Christmas at the minute, which is weird but great. But over the summer I just don't bother because I just dig them out every week when they bolt. So yeah, there's some that I've had a good go with. I don't know if anyone else has got any good lettuce replacements.
There's another question which does it work to give out recipes and cooking tip leaflets in veg boxes? Anyone that's tried putting strange stuff in veg boxes, and what's been the feedback? Anyone got an answer for Rosie?
It's not where I give out advice quite a lot. I do a little sales cart. So I mean, my advice is generally the same. Cook it with garlic, cook it with harissa paste, or put it in the microwave. I am not the best person. And I'm looking at it with a chef who helps me. He's on the end of the phone quite a lot. And it does seem to help people. People want to grow things or eat things and try things that are different. You have to often eat them in front of them so they know they're not going to poison themselves. But also just trust. And I'm lucky that, again, my little sales cart, I don't have to charge a lot for what I'm giving. So people can try it for quite cheap, which I think makes a massive difference. Don't worry, guys, I'm not competing with you. I do not produce a lot. It's very much a handful, but it does help. Or having a website. So if anyone feels like starting a website with unusual crop recipes, then I think you're in for a winner. But yeah, I think that's maybe the next step. That's where people like Food Forever, the Chef's Manifesto. Katy, I don't know if you've had much with veg recipes.
I mean, we actually find some of the not very unusual vegetables people have still never heard of or tasted before because the supermarkets only sell about 5 things. So we have quite a lot of recipes on our website, which is then good because you can just put it out once, and then if you have newsletters, you can refer to it every year when it's in season, which I think are pretty popular. I think we used to put paper recipes into bags. We don't do that anymore, but yeah, I think it does help. It just gives people a reason to like something that they don't know how to get the best out of otherwise.
Yeah, I think Sarah is saying she is cooking guidelines rather than recipes, which is also a really good idea. But yeah, I think websites are the way forward as well. Like I get a veg box and the amount of paper that comes in, it shocks me every single time. I mean, it goes in the compost bin, but still, what a waste of a resource. I've got my phone, and I know not everyone does, but I think most people, when you've had to order your veg box online, assume you have online.
Yeah. And Joe as well says you can get a volunteer to do it or get customers to share, which is another really good idea. It could even be that you have a forum or something on your website where people share what works, or even like an Instagram hashtag or something, just somewhere where things collect together. We get a lot of people tagging us in things they've made, which is like great for us to have the option to be able to share when something's worked really well.
Cool. I think that's really, really good idea, because it's that next step, isn't it? It's what do you do with it? It's nice to have done it, but what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Works, what's successful. So yeah, that sounds really cool. I think hashtags are great as well. I've just found them. I don't know how old I am now, but really good idea.
Great. Well, we're kind of coming to the end. So thank you ever so much, Helena and Katy. That's been really, I've loved it. And it looks from the comments like everyone else has. I will send out this kind of relevant bits of the chat to everyone who has attended, and a link to where the webinar is on our website. I'll also put contacts for Helena and Katy into that email, and do get in touch with us if you would like to kind of have a go at filling in a risk assessment together in a group of people, where it might be more fun than doing it on your own. So brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Take care, and yeah, see you at another webinar.